we would have totally done that if we would have stuck around any longer and done a few odds and ends like that to make it a little more easy. But yep, all kinds of options. But it was $800 per square foot to build in Napa Valley. So we were like, no. It was because of the inflation, because of the workload that the contractors had, because of the fires and stuff. So we just decided to sell the land to somebody else who wants to grow weed or wine, whatever the heck they're into.
You know, in my van, I have a foot pump water with a 7-gallon water tank underneath, and then you just use your foot and pump it through the faucet, and that's great, simple. I think, like, the whole setup was maybe like $40, and if you get just a couple 7 gallons or whatever you can fit in the space that you're working with, you know, that makes it really easy to get running water for dishes and you can get purified water, so, you know, all your drinking water and everything covered.
Excellent idea. Anyone interested in trying that? I'd give it a go. I don't know if I would just fully sell one's house if you have never lived tiny, but maybe branch out to it. Give it a shot. It might be for you.
Yeah,
ladies. Go ahead.
You brought that up because being an advocate for the tiny house movement, I see a lot of tiny house fails. And one of the biggest ones, there's two kind of main ones, I think. One of the biggest ones is people romanticize the tiny living aspect and then invest tens of thousands of dollars into a tiny house before they've actually spent any significant amount of time trying it. So, like, yes, maybe you went camping for a couple weeks and you thought it was amazing. But, you know, what if that couple weeks turns into 12 months and you haven't considered what it would be like to camp in the middle of winter, and you've not necessarily built your tiny house to be, you know, winter ready. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is for people who buy tiny houses that are kind of stock. So they're like, oh, that floor plan looks perfect, tiny house, tumbleweeds or whatever it is. And they have like 6 different floor plans, and you pick one, you have it built, only to find out that's not how you live. The way that people live, their movements, even so much as, you know, like the way that you like your kitchen set up is super, super unique to you. And unless you pay like a really great amount of attention as to how it's most efficient, how you like it, chances are you're going to be very unhappy because, you know, if you're in a giant kitchen, there's enough room for you to kind of make it work no matter what, right? Not everyone puts their cups in the same place. Not everyone puts their plates in the same place or their, you know, coffee machine in the same place. But if you're only dealing with a total of 200 square feet, and then your options for kind of moving around and changing your you know, layout of things are severely limited. So if you decide you want to try tiny living, my 2 recommendations is to try it for an extended period of time before you invest tens of thousands of dollars into a tiny house, and then also pay very close attention to how you live specifically in your kitchen and your bathroom so that you know how much space you're going to need and what the layout is going to need to be. Because even though there's a lot of pre-designed floor plans, they were designed without anyone actually living in them. They were great architecturally.
I think that's brilliant advice. And I did go to a tiny house expo where they had several, I think up to 20 or 30 tiny houses set up. This was actually in Chattanooga, or right outside of Chattanooga. And it was really cool to go see all the layouts, and I can see what you're talking about, where each human is going to need a custom setup, and it'd be best to find which setup's best for you as opposed to just looking at a picture and get in there, move around, see how you move in there. And I just thought it was so cool to walk in and out of them. Some were larger and some were smaller. Some of them were $30,000 to $50,000. So I was like,
you'll be lucky to get one at that price point at this time. Most of the tiny houses at the time, and I know that you want to cut to a commercial, but at the time that you went, and even the time when I was involved in the tiny house movement, there were a lot of people kind of just, transcribing their house carpentry skills into tiny house carpentry skills. They'd never done it before, but they knew they could build houses. Whether or not they knew that they could build them in hurricane speeds, which is what a tiny house basically needs to withstand, and something very different. And there are also like a ton more regulations now than there were before as to what is legal, what's not, what the building codes are. And so what you found is there's been a distillation of the people who can do it and do it right. And in most cases, that requires a ton more investment for the company. And so if you're going to get, a 24-foot tiny house, you're probably going to spend $50,000, if not $100,000 on a tiny house. I mean, we spent $50,000 on ours, and that was way back in 2014. So, yeah, I think that living tiny doesn't necessarily mean it's living cheap, at least, especially with the initial investment.
The initial investment, you might make it back because you're using less utilities and maybe heating less of a house and cooling less of a house. For sure, you'd get some pickups later on.
Yeah, and there's no mortgage, right? So if you're currently paying, $1,500 a month in mortgage, that kind of goes towards whatever you spent on the tiny house. But the initial outlay is pretty high considering there aren't too many lenders. You can't get a home loan for it, right? There are some lenders that do RV loans that also will lend it to tiny houses. There's also very few tiny house insurance companies. So you're driving it down the road, but not too many people are going to cover it insurance-wise. So there's still a lot of challenges to be had with tiny houses, which is why I think campers may be a better temporary solution until we can get some better regulations and I guess allowances, just like in the way of regulations for tiny houses. California is doing a good job. Texas is doing a pretty good job of finding space, in their models for it. But overall, I think we're a ways off before tiny houses are going to be commonly accepted in most municipalities.
We've got to start somewhere. We are on our way. And we are going to cut to a commercial, and we will be back to talk more tiny house.
Welcome.
That one's the wrong one. Sorry, guys. This one.
You're listening to Third Eye Political Radio, and we really appreciate you joining us. And when you have a moment, why don't you check out our sister station, Heart Over Ego Radio, where we offer a lineup of shows that are guaranteed to raise your vibrations and guide you into your best life. We offer shows on Sundays, Everyday Psychic Radio, Mondays, The Alchemy Sisters, Tuesdays, Radical Spirituality, and on Wednesdays, All for One is Love. And then we close out the week on Fridays with Rain Radio. Amazing shows produced for you 5 days a week, only on Blog Talk Radio. That's right, it's our sister station, Heart Over Ego Radio.
Welcome back, everybody. This is Downward Dogma, and you're here with Jennie, Tasha, and Sarah. And before our break, we were talking about tiny house living and how Sarah suggested if you haven't lived in a tiny house situation, maybe a camper would be a more affordable temporary way to see if that is for you, if that type of life is for you. We were discussing how nowadays you can spend up to $100,000 on a tiny house, so it's not always cheap up front. So if you're not sure of how tiny you can live, give it a little more affordable trial run at the beginning there. Or if you know you already like it, go ahead and get yourself a tiny house. Ladies, we have about 20 minutes. Is there anything in particular on your minds that you want to talk about? Sarah, anything in particular?
No.
Tasha, you got anything for us, anything particular crossing your mind?
Yeah, I just want to follow up on the tiny house thing.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's also important to follow your heart and whatever you're feeling guided towards, because when I began my tiny house journey, I came from a 5-bedroom house with 5 kids into an RV, and it was purely just jumping. Like, I just felt like it was what was right for me, and I wanted to be in nature, and I wanted to force myself to slow down. I wanted to force myself to not be distracted and to really pay attention to what I felt was valuable. And I couldn't do that within the normal living circumstances. So I created an environment for myself to where that was all that was available. And there's always other options to tiny houses. You can, build a schoolie. Yes, you can buy those and spend a lot of money, but you can also build one for not very much money. School buses are not that expensive to buy. Generally, when you get them off of like auction from schools, they have the best maintenance. School buses are awesome in maintenance. They're the most safe vehicles on the road. And if you have a little bit of skill and imagination, you can build all kinds of things. When I got my conversion van, I just bought a conversion van it actually did already have the seats taken out of it, but floor and laid plywood, laid flooring, built a sink and a bed, and installed chairs for my kids in their car seats. And I did all of that for probably $3,000. So there are a lot of options, and, efficiency is, I would definitely agree that efficiency is extremely important. You want to see how it works before you jump into it for the most part, but I didn't. Before I did it, I didn't have any experience. I hadn't stayed in an RV or lived in an RV, especially not with all of my kids. And so sometimes you just got to jump,
Take the dive. Well, it's always good learning, and as long as we don't have tons of attachments to the outcome, we should be okay and gain knowledge no matter what you do. I often ask my teacher, but what is the best thing to do? And he says, you'll learn no matter what you do, but this one looks a little shinier. And I'm like, good, yes. Some things look a little shinier for you, but you learn no matter what you do. And what appears to be a failure in the human world, it really isn't a failure. It's an experience, and I think we can back off that expectation of it has to look a certain way for it to be a good experience or a learned experience. Again, kind of with that construct of what humans think is winning. Well, winning's a lot of things, and it can look a lot of different ways. So let's see here if there's anything else. We touched on it a little bit earlier, and we'll probably cut short a little bit today and get out in that sunshine, but there was something that we were mentioning right when Sarah started talking about the value levels. I don't know how to say it, but I know it starts with an M, and it maybe looks like a Russian name. Is it the Maslov?
Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Can you say it one more time?
Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Yeah, when I first saw that, one of my friends had mentioned it. It was years ago, like 10 years ago. I was living in Boulder, and my one friend had studied psychology a little bit in college, and she had mentioned that structure, that pyramid, and I looked at it, and it just rang so true to me. It just really opened up my eyes to why people act the way they act. If you're in survival mode, you're going to act like you're freaking out and in scarcity and constantly panicked, and it's because some basic needs aren't being met. And in the colors of this chart were the colors of the chakras, and the very bottom one, I think, was the home and the roof over your head and food, basic needs. The color was red, and it associated with the root chakra, which is at the base of your spine, and also associated with the color red, which has everything to do with your grounding, your structure, your comfort, your security. So I think that these pyramids and structures and understandings are such a great way to really understand why people respond the way they respond, why they act the way they act. And if you're a boss, you're going to be guaranteed to have every kind of person, if you have a lot of employees, every kind of person under the sun in your care. And it's helpful to not expect that everyone's coming from the same space. So I like these charts and these pyramids and these ways that we can look and dissect things. And, of course, psychology is one of my favorite topics. So I just find it wildly interesting.
Yeah, I agree. I think when you put a political spin on the Maslow hierarchy of needs, if you are operating from the base of the triangle where you're literally in survival mode, you are going to resonate with the person who basically comes from a place that you already are, which is one of fear, because you aren't sure where your next paycheck is coming. You don't know where your next meal is coming from.